other places. So just I'm really I want to thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to think about some of the concepts from the Baha'i faith and look at some of the writings and kind of reflect on the life of what the faith is and what it means to myself and our family. And I guess you probably get it that Marina's part of the family. One of our wonderful daughters-in-law. We're really blessed. We have 3 daughters-in-law, and I keep telling people the only way we could get women into our family was get our sons to marry lovely women, and they've all done that. And so we're really blessed. And as it happens, Brett, Marine's husband, he just texted me a few minutes ago, and he's in New York, and he said, he really missed being in the fire. I said, I don't know if that's the case. I believe him, but he said he was having a New York pizza. So I think that's probably a good second thing to do tonight, except for coming to the fireside. But it's a joy. The family is a lot of fun, and we have a lot of fun together and enjoy many things. And particularly we enjoy our service in the faith and being together and so forth. Well, look, this is a really interesting subject because when Farouz asked if I would do this, and I really want to thank her for asking me to do this, because it made me had to think a little bit about the whole subject of spirituality. And I have to admit to you, when I first became a Baha'i, which was a long time ago, it just appealed to me kind of intellectually. I thought, wow, this is really smart stuff, about one world and one religion and one people. It seemed to make an awful lot of sense, this intellectually. And I was really attracted to it from that perspective almost immediately, because many of you know that my wife, who's on the call tonight, Meim, and we became Baha'is in 4 days. We read about it, and then we became Baha'is. And then we had to learn to say the word like Baha'u'llah and things like that, which we had trouble figuring out how to say at the beginning, but eventually I think we've learned to do that. But it was so appealing in terms of what it had to say about the world and about the future of the world and what the role of humanity was, and both everything all seemed to come together. And as of course we just accepted the faith so rapidly. But it wasn't because I think it was totally new, because I think you kind of know this stuff before you hear about it, at least I think. And how would you not believe there's one world? I mean, maybe some people don't accept that, but it's real. There's one world, and it's hard to believe there's one humanity. How could we not believe that? There's 8 billion people. That's a lot, but there's one people. And then I guess you'd have to think, well, maybe there's a future for this world. And maybe some people think there really isn't, the way the world's going now. But on the other hand, even way back before we became Baha'is, I kind of believed that there would be a future and we would be doing something. And lo and behold, we found on the Baha'i faith, well, the future of humankind is very exciting. And the far distant future, the world will be a very different place. So when we embraced the faith, it made a lot of sense to me. But then I kind of started to learn a little bit more about the requisites for this world and what was a human being about, and a little bit about what spirituality was and so forth. I'm still learning because, being a Baha'i is kind of an ongoing learning process, and you never stop. I just want to tell you right now, there's no end to this learning, and it's exciting because there's always new things to learn and discover and so forth. Many of the people on the call tonight, some of you might be going to the Association for Baha'i Studies conference in Atlanta in a couple of weekends. And we were just talking to our son, Todd, who is very much involved in that. And I think there's about 1,800 people going to be going to that conference. And there'll be many different discussions. One of them, of course, would be, I'm sure, on spirituality, but on a whole lot of other subjects, which are things which Baha'is are concerned about. We believe hundreds of millions of people are concerned about in the world, and trying to find the remedy to bring about a world which is much more consistent with the dignity of humankind, and which we believe we all have inherent dignity. Well, look, I wanted to just off the bat, just sort of give you a sort of summary what I think. Sometimes you'll say to people, well, are you a member of a religion? They know, but I'm very spiritual. They'll say something like that. And I'm saying to myself, well, now I wonder what that means if you're very spiritual. And if you look up the concept of spirituality, it kind of has this notion to it that to be spiritual means you're not, well, you're searching for something. I mean, it's part of a journey, or you believe in something. You believe you're a spiritual being, and you believe there's something more than you. And I mean, these are not my ideas. This is what one finds in definitions of spirituality. And you're kind of on a journey. You're trying a journey of discovery about yourself and about the world. And so it's like, there's sort of like a lot of questions. What am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Where are we going? How are we getting there? And so forth. There's a lot of questions and reflections on that. And people will spend their whole life, I think, sort of on that journey of discovery. And they'll try this, they'll try that. They'll do this meditation, maybe that, whatever. They'll be involved in a number of things to fulfill that spiritual quest, which is inherent in all of us because we're spiritual beings, to kind of resolve that and give comfort to that desire to find out our purpose in life and why we are here and what we're doing. Well, that's sort of it in a nutshell, as I understand. I kind of summarizes a terrible description of it all, but you get the drift. And so inherently, I think we would have to say that all of us are spiritual in terms of searching for meaning and understanding. I mean, maybe some people are doing it much more in a concerted way, and other people are doing it much more infrequently. But generally speaking, people, I think, are really, the big questions of life are there. I want to tell you an interesting thing, and this happened a number of years ago, and I probably have mentioned this before, but I was at a conference, well, actually at a training session for a whole weekend with a group of other doctors. And I love doctors. I'm a doctor, and they're pretty nice people, most of them, anyway, I think. And we were at a training session together, and the whole idea of this training session, which is being run by somebody, a facilitator, this is the word we use now to facilitate our interaction. This man was there and then hired to bring us together and to have us develop a much better relationship with each other in a working, in our work environment. Now, I thought we all got along before anyway, but I guess we were being told we weren't getting along well enough, even though we all thought we were great. But I guess part of the job of facilitating is to point out at least weaknesses and then find some strengths and build on that. Well, I'm sure not everyone does that, but that's the feeling I kind of got that we were there. And I was thinking, well, you know, a good 10-year-old Baha'i that's gone through some of the junior youth books would have done just as good a job, maybe even better, because this youth would have had a better understanding about life. At least that was my understanding. So at the weekend, we went along with the weekend, and everyone was congenial, and we were collegial, and we were, you know, all together and having meals together, and we all like each other. So it was hard to know what we were going to do better. But then at the end of the weekend, it was a very interesting thing. This man said to us, as he went around the table, and there was probably about 10 or 12, I think maybe 12 of us. He said, now, tell me what you want to be. Now, this is after 18 hours of intensive, I don't know, learning together. And this man was being paid a ton of money, folks, a lot of money. So maybe 11-year-old Baha'i could do this for a lot of money, but this guy was making a lot of money for doing this. And as he went around the table and he asked every doctor that was there, and we were all doctors, and each one of them said, well, at least, well, not everyone, because I didn't say that, but they all said, I want to be a good person. I mean, this was the apex of the weekend. And I thought to myself, no, I'm saying this, I thought, what does a good person look like? I mean, how can you say you want to be good, but then never give any definition to it? Because I mean, you could be a good thief. You could be I don't know what you meant by good. So I went around the room like this, and I'm thinking, holy cow, these are really smart people I work with. And all they could come up with is, I want to be good. Well, they were good surgeons. They were good clinicians. I mean, I knew all that, but beyond that, they seemed to be able to just articulate, I want to be good. Well, now, when you were 5 years old, your mother or father said to you, you be good. And you learned that then, that you had to be a good person. But imagine being 45 or 65 and saying, I want to be good. I mean, has it not improved? I mean, has not something not changed? Or, well, anyway, I'm sure they meant well, and I know they did, but it was an interesting thing that they weren't able to describe it beyond, I want to be good. So I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe there's more to it than that. And maybe these spiritual beings, which we all are, were trying to articulate something that they had trouble saying because they didn't have the vocabulary nor the experience, and I mean that in a positive way, to articulate what it meant to be a good person, you see, because, so when you think of what Baha'u'llah says about in one of the writings, that let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to yourself. Okay, so that's a quote from the Baha'i writings. And I'm thinking, well, wouldn't that be a great thing to say? I want to be a world embracing citizen. Would that be a good thing? Like, if I wanted to be good, would being a world citizen be a good thing? Well, I'm thinking, yeah, that would be a great thing because first of all, I'm a Baha'i. And secondly, it sounds like an exciting thing to be a world citizen. So that would be one. And then Baha'u'llah says, he says things like, well, the earth is one country and mankind is citizens. Well, I'm thinking, well, that's an interesting idea because if you don't understand that, then maybe you think everything revolves around Canada or the United States, and you're not really looking at the earth as one country. You're seeing the world in a different way. So as I came out of that meeting, I thought, really, these are all spiritual beings, and they're probably seeking spirituality because that's what we're defined to be. But without a sort of moral compass, without kind of teachings or guidance or something, we could just kind of go along being good on the spur of the moment and doing a good thing here and a good thing there, but they're kind of not a collective good. There's something kind of missing, at least it seemed to me. So I wanted to read you a quote from The Secret of Divine Civilization. So first of all, it won't be a secret anymore because I'm going to read it to you. So the secret will be out. But this is actually a book. Well, it's a book now, but this is something that Baha'u'llah asked his son Abdu'l-Baha to write to Persia. And this was in 1875. This is a long time ago, folks, a long time ago. And I have to tell you, this is probably the most important social and economic development book that will ever be written. Okay, I'm saying this not just because I'm a Baha'i, but because it's so extraordinary, the things that Abdu'l-Baha says in this book. And I'm sure you can find other extraordinary things written by other people about social and economic development, but this is how it opens up. And I want to read this to you because I think this is extraordinary. He starts off by, first of all, talking to us about wisdom and intellect and intelligence. So the very first page, he says that Providence, which would be God, has chosen the reality of man and honored it with intellect and wisdom, the two most luminous lights of either world. So he's speaking, I guess, of this world and the next. I mean, intellect and wisdom. Isn't that interesting? And then he goes on to say, this supreme emblem of God stands first in the order of creation and first in rank. So then he goes on to say this about how to use this wisdom and intellect. And he says this, he says, O ye that have minds to know, raise up your suppliant hands to the heaven of one God and humble yourselves and be lowly before him and thank him for this supreme endowment. This is intellect and wisdom, and implore him to succor us until in this present age, godlike impulses may radiate from the conscience of mankind. Okay, so let's think about that in relationship to spirituality, godlike impulses, okay? If you ever talk to someone who say, I'm spiritual, and say, well, tell me about godlike impulses. What would they look like? I mean, because this is what Abdu'l-Baha is saying here. And then he goes on to say, they radiate from the conscience of mankind, and this divinely kindled fire, which has been entrusted to the human heart, may never die away. And then he says this, consider carefully all these highly varied phenomena, these concepts, this knowledge, these technical procedures and philosophical systems, these sciences, arts, and industries and inventions, all are emanations of the human mind. So he's giving total credit to the human being to be able to do extraordinary things. This is page 2 of the secret. This is a pretty good opening, isn't it? And then he goes on to say, whatever people has ventured deeper into the shoreless sea has come to excel the rest. So he said, the deeper you go with knowledge and understanding, you're going to excel. This is really exciting. And then he says, the happiness and pride of a nation consists in this, that he should shine out like the sun in the high heaven of knowledge. And then he says, and the honor and distinction of the individual consists in this, that he among all the world's multitudes should become a source of social good. Okay, so is a spiritual soul a source of social good? Okay, that's what I'd have to ask about spirituality. Are you just trying to become pious and loving, or are you going to be a source of social good? And what would that look like? And he says, is there any larger bounty inconceivable than this, than an individual looking within himself, so now we're looking in, should find that by the confirming grace of God, he's become the cause of peace and well-being, of happiness and advantage to his fellow men. And then Abdu'l-Baha says this, no, by the one true God, there is no greater bliss, no more complete delight. You want bliss? Be a source of social good. That's what Abdu'l-Baha said. I mean, isn't that extraordinary? I mean, I'm often thinking, okay, we want to be happy. You want to be blissful? Well, part of the remedy, the message seems to be become a source of social good. Page 2 of The Secret of Science Civilization. It's an interesting thing because you see, we may think that being a spiritual being and kind of being filled with spirituality has to do with kind of internal personal reflection and development and so forth. And I'm not suggesting that's not part of it, but it needs to have an expression in which it takes its life, its spirit into action, into service. Other than that, well, Baha'u'llah has said, basically, we shouldn't become ascetics. We shouldn't go on a mountain, levitate, meditate, and reflect. No, we have to enter the world, and we have to learn to exercise our spirituality. We have to become those spiritual beings that which we are inherently, and manifest the virtues which we have latent within us, the capacity to be a spiritual being. So how do we learn to be spiritual without learning to be patient, to be empathetic, to be forgiving, to be forbearing, all of those things which are terribly difficult? But that's what spirituality is about. It's not simply about some sort of personal, I think, looking inward. It's about looking outward and becoming that as a result of looking outward. In other words, it's sort of like the seed is in, the flower is in the seed, but it doesn't manifest itself till it becomes alive and flourishes and so forth. It has to come out of the seed to know what it really is. So this is one of my understandings of it, and it's an important thing because the Baha'i community itself is basically this environment in which every human being is capable then of discovering their latent spirituality and exercising it by learning how to do difficult things. You know, when I'll have to confess a few things here to you, although confession in the Baha'i faith is not acceptable because you will not forgive me, so that part of the covenant is gone. But let me tell you a couple of things, and I may have expressed this before. When Meim and I first became Baha'is, we had been, of course, going fairly religiously and, you know, to church every Sunday. My father-in-law was the head of the Presbyterian Church, and my stepfather was the United Church minister. And so, you know, we were pretty schooled in Christian teachings and loved them very much. But for some reason, everyone seemed to look the same in our church. And we were trying to think, well, how do we become world citizens when everyone looks exactly the same as us? Not that they were not nice people, they were all loving people and so forth. But so we became Baha'is in 4 days, and then we went to our first Baha'i gathering, which was called a feast, which some of the Baha'is would recognize that, every 19 days. And we go into this feast, and all of a sudden, there's all these people there that look quite different than me. Of course, there was a couple of Persian people there. I'd never really seen a Persian person before. I mean, why would I? I was going to a church down the road, and there was a couple of other people. There was maybe a Jewish person there who was it was a mix. It was a mix. And then we started saying some prayers, and all of a sudden there's a lovely prayer by Abdu'l-Baha, which again, loving prayer, and I could understand it. remember we've been Baha'is 2 weeks, hadn't read too much. Well, they read a bit, but didn't quite understand even who Abdu'l-Baha was at that time, except I really liked what he wrote because I could understand a little bit better than Baha'u'llah at that time. And then there was a prayer, and then there was a prayer in French. Well, now, folks, I mean, I'd never heard a French prayer, and I'm thinking, well, you know, I don't even know if I like this. And I'm not confessing here. I'm just telling you the facts of life, because I'd never heard a French prayer. Then I heard a German prayer, and now I'm really getting quite nervous because I didn't know what the heck was going on. And I'm trying to be a Baha'i because I believe about being a world citizen, but you know, it didn't feel comfortable at that time. And then, of course, then, as I mentioned before, the very worst thing happened. I heard a Persian chant, and that just was the hardest thing to understand because I'd never heard a Persian chant. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking to myself, you know, as a spiritual being who loves spirituality, I don't like anybody here. Like I was having a real trouble because everything that I thought I believed in as being spirit, you know, I love people. I didn't like. I really, and that, my wife, God love her, said, I love this. People are praying in different languages. And I didn't like it. But I'm thinking maybe I became a Baha'i because I don't like anybody. Like, you know, I was going through this existential crisis. And then I'm thinking, well, that's why I became a Baha'i. I have to grow up. Like, you know, so I'm saying this to you because within 2 or 3 weeks, I really started liking Persian prayers. And I you know, it's amazing what the faith can do to you. But you see, when Baha'u'llah says, you know, let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to your own self, I was letting it confine to myself, you know, what I didn't like, right? I mean, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, if I want to be a Baha'i, I have to try to become a world citizen, right? And that's going to take I've got to change. I've got to start to feel differently. I mean, I know it sounds obvious to a lot of the Baha'is here, but it's not so obvious at the beginning, folks. It's, you know, there's a bit of a change. And that's why I think educating our children young and bringing them, having different cultures around them and languages, and they grow up as world citizens, it's just marvelous because a lot of people are so protected and nervous about differences, and they don't want anything to change. And they can't believe that, you know, that the people down the road speak different languages and they have different kind of food. They don't feel, well, folks, we're Baha'is, and, you know, we have a little feeling about the whole world. At least I think most of us do. And, you know, and we go to different places and we kind of learn to adapt and we try it. And because we're one human family, right? And this is what the faith is about. So, well, anyway, I learned that, and I thank God and Baha'u'llah that this happened to me, because I don't know how I would have changed so radically if I hadn't been sort of forced to as becoming a Baha'i. And I mean that in a loving way, because I could have gone merrily along thinking I was a spiritual being loving everybody and knowing, in fact, nothing about loving other people, because I never got exposed to that difference and having to be with people who are very different than me. Well, folks, I wanted to just move on a little bit about spirituality. I don't know if I can get a screen share. Can I do that? I wanted to put a couple of quotes on. Is that a possibility? Can you screen share me, or is that not possible?
You should have a screen share. Did you try?
Yeah, I do.
You have it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll see if I can find what I'm looking for. Just 1 second here. It's always a challenge finding. I have so many PowerPoint things going on.
But it's giving you the option, right, Dave?
Yeah, just let me see if I can find what I'm looking for. Okay. Oops, I think not. Are you still there? Am I still here?
Yes. Yeah, you're still here, Dave.
Okay, well, I don't think I've got it. I don't see the little share thing. That's the problem.
Here, let me give.
That's okay. I'll leave it. I'll just
now you're co-host if you want to.
Yeah, I just have to.
You need to move your mouse down the ribbon.
Yeah,
with is hidden. It's either on the top or on the bottom.
Yeah.
Where you have also the microphone or the camera. It's just a green share screen.
Yeah, I know, but it's no, I'm not seeing it. I've lost it, unfortunately.
Okay.
Okay, well, hang on. I have to come back to where you guys are because
You can act out what you wanted to tell us.
let me just well, anyway. Okay, let me see this 1 second. I might have got it now. Hang on.
Sure.
There it is.
Okay, good. We see it.
Oh, we got it. Okay, now we're going to do it. Okay. Okay, are we there? Yeah. Can you see that?
Yep, we see it.
Okay,
Spirituality.
perfect. I'm sorry about that because I had a couple of other PowerPoints on my screen share. Okay, so look, so this was a quote that came from the Universal House of Justice, which is the head administrative body of the Baha'i faith. This was a number of years ago, 11 years ago, actually, in Rizwan 2012. Every Rizwan, which is a period in April, during the period where in 1863, Baha'u'llah revealed himself that he was the messenger of God for this day. This is a period called Rizwan. And every year at this time, the Universal House of Justice has written to the Baha'is of the world. They write many messages during the year, but these are all, this is referred to as a Rizwan message. And this is a very beautiful message. Well, they're all beautiful, but there's a quote I wanted to read to you. And I thought this would be an interesting one. It says, the state of the world reflects a distortion of the human spirit, not its essential nature. So that's an important thing to just consider, because we're thinking of the wars going on, the tension between countries and so forth. And the House of Justice is saying that this is a distortion of what the human spirit is really all about. And then they go on to say the purpose of every manifestation of God is to effect a transformation. And many Baha'is will be familiar with this idea about the object of every revelation is to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind, Baha'u'llah says. And then the House goes on to say this, and this transformation naturally occurs as a growing body of people united by divine precepts collectively seek to develop spiritual capacities to contribute to a process of societal change. Well, that's a pretty interesting idea because I think for the first time that I'm aware, and I was a Christian for a long, long time, I would, if someone had said to me, what was the overarching feeling of Christianity, or one could say maybe Islam, and so I can only say this, I wouldn't have been able to articulate it so clearly as this. In other words, that to develop spiritual capacity to contribute to the process of societal change, that wouldn't have come foremost in my mind then. It does now, but it would not have been. So something happened with the coming of Baha'u'llah's revelation, at least it's being articulated, that the purpose of the revelation is to somehow create a different societal change. So in a wonderful little book, some of you may have read this, Revelation of Social Reality, written by Paul Lampo, a present member of the Universal House of Justice. Many of us have known Mr. Lampo for a long time. He's quite an extraordinary person and how he writes and puts things together. This is just a quote from his book on page 11. It says, it's incumbent upon every man of insight and understanding, referring to Baha'u'llah's writings, to strive to translate that which has been written into reality and action. Okay, so this is an interesting thing because one could say, well, to be spiritual, what would that look like? And now Baha'u'llah is saying to translate it into reality and action. So that's not just reflecting on your personal life of being a good person, but now it means taking that inherent goodness that you want and reflecting it into some sort of action in the world. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? And maybe it makes sense to large numbers of people, because how could you be good without testing it out or doing it? So that, that's clear. But then it goes on to say, to be a Baha'i is to live the life, means to comprehend the word of God. So now that's an interesting thing because, okay, well, what is the word of God? And how would you translate that into action? To act on it and individually and collectively. Okay, so not just an individual spiritual, but a collective spirituality, which is interesting. And it is to make the reality of one's personal life and the pattern of society at large reflect the teachings. Okay, so now that's really interesting, because now we have to think, at least as we're talking about spirituality, well, what are the teachings and how do we reflect those teachings in the life? What would that look like? Okay, so let me give you one example. Okay, well, Baha'u'llah teaches, and the Baha'i faith teaches about the equality of women and men. Well, what does that look like? And have we got any historical reference to what that looks like? And my understanding is, if we do, it's been we're not aware of it in a great way. In other words, but certainly within the teachings of Baha'u'llah, this equality of women and men is a fundamental principle in which we're trying to live with and understand and discover. And what does that look like? And what will it look like in the future? And so to be a spiritual being now, to be filled with spirituality, it means we have to discover how to apply this new principle and this new understanding in society. What would that look like? And so forth. Okay, well, that's just an example that I see. Now, here's the House of Justice was writing a letter to an individual and quoting from the beloved guardian in certain ways. I wanted to just read you this. At the core of the aims of the faith, so this would be now the Baha'i faith, are the establishment of justice and unity in the world. Okay. The removal of prejudice and enmity from among all people, the awakening of compassion and understanding in the hearts of all men and women, and the raising of souls to a new level of spirituality and behavior through the vitalizing influence of divine revelation. The course set forth by Baha'u'llah for the attainment of these aims is the double task. So there's two things that we have to try to do as a spiritual being: the building of an ideal society and the perfecting of behaviors of individuals. Wow, that's interesting. So you can't, well, you can do whatever you want, but from what I read here, you can't sort of have it one way or the other. You have to have kind of it's a complete package. You have to be engaged in a building of an ideal society, for whatever that looks like, based on these new principles and teachings. And at the same time, to perfect your behavior. And you can only perfect your behavior in the building of an ideal society. You see, it's a kind of an interesting conundrum, because now you can't just be a developed human being all by yourself. You have to be doing this within the relationship of building a better society. Well, what is that society going to look like? And how would you know how to go about building it? Well, that's, of course, when we find ourselves in the teachings of Baha'u'llah and in its guidance that that beloved Abdu'l-Baha gives to the community of Persia in 1875 as an example. This book describes the ways by which and what is required to build a new and better and perfected civilization. And by doing that, how the individual themselves, in himself and herself, becomes a perfected human being. So Abdu'l-Baha goes on in the same book, Secret of Divine Civilization, on page 3. Let me just read to you. Senses and faculties have been bestowed upon us to be devoted to the service of the general good. Okay, so you'd say, well, to the general good, well, what about my good? No, well, yes, that's part of the general good, but we need to be looking outward, it seems, as well as looking inward. And he said, we should be continually establishing new bases for human happiness and creating and promoting new instrumentalities towards this end. So what people are doing that? I mean, am I doing that? Am I establishing new bases for human happiness? I don't, I have to look at myself and say, how excellent, how honorable is man if he rises to fulfill his responsibilities? How wretched, oh my God, and contemptible if he shuts his eyes to the welfare of society and wastes his precious life in pursuing his own selfish interests and personal advantages. Doesn't that last sentence kind of resonate with what's happening in the world, at least on social media? I mean, isn't that what's happening? And then he goes on to say, supreme happiness is man's, and he beholds the signs of God in the world and in the human soul, if he urges on the steed of high endeavor in the arena of civilization and justice. As kind of I mean, it's a really loaded paragraph, I think. And, again, this is page 3 of The Secret of Divine Civilization. Okay, so then you say, well, now what's the role of religion in all this spirituality development and becoming a spiritual being? Because some people would say, well, I'm religious, but I'm spiritual, but not religious. So I'm saying, okay, well, that's fine. But how do you develop spirituality? Well, I pick and choose. I like this, I like that. I mean, it's kind of an eclectic thing then to be spiritual. If there's no moral compass, like how would you know where you're going? We'd say, well, it feels right to do this. I feel good doing it. Okay, fine. Maybe you're right, but maybe you're not. Maybe somehow the purpose of the great world religions was to give moral compass direction to where we're supposed to collectively be going and individually to be going. So I see religion is kind of like, it's not a restriction, but it liberates us to not have to wander in the paths of delusion, which is part of a prayer habit of Amen, wandering in the paths of bereft of discernment. In other words, we could be trying to be a good person, but have nowhere to know where to go except what feels good at the moment. And then something else feels good, and then something doesn't feel good. I don't know. We would just keep trudging along, trying to be a spiritual being. But Abdu'l-Baha says, to us, look, religion is not just a series of beliefs, a set of customs, which a lot of people think, well, I don't want to be restricted by these things. He says that religion is the teachings of the Lord God. Well, does that mean anything to you? What about beliefs and customs? Let's throw them out because maybe they're not. But what about the teachings of God? I mean, is that not going to be important? He says these teachings constitute the very life of humankind, which urge high thoughts upon the mind, refine the character, and lay the groundwork for man's everlasting honor. Well, that's kind of something to look at. Maybe you say, well, I don't like religion, but maybe I have to think about the teachings of God and forget about religion per se, or whatever you think it is, with all its bells and whistles and things. I don't know. But what about the teachings of God? Is that important? We say, well, I don't know. But to me, it's like important, because if the great world religions came, if they hadn't come, where would we be? I don't know. You say, well, we'd be spiritual beings trying to find our way. I don't think so. I think the great world religions have brought us to this point. This is where we are. Yeah, we've made tons of mistakes, folks. Yeah, we've messed up. But the great teachings of the great world religions has been a universal collective moral compass. And we've not done well with that. We've made lots of mistakes, but even then we've come to where we are now, and we're trying to understand the world now in a very extraordinary way. So then he goes on to say this in a very wonderful little talk he was giving while he was traveling across North America. He says, true religion, this is Abdu'l-Baha, is the source of love and agreement amongst men. Okay, well, wow. He doesn't say it's a source of conflict. He says it's a source of love and agreement. The cause of development of praiseworthy qualities. But the people are holding to the counterfeit and imitation. So he's pretty firm about this. He's look, religion is not this counterfeit stuff you think it is. It's the source of love and agreement. And if it's not the source of love and agreement, it's not religion. You may call it a religion, it's not what God wants. But the people are holding to the counterfeit and imitation, negligent of the reality which unifies. Okay? So they are bereft and deprived of the radiance of religion. Isn't that extraordinary? I mean, I think it is. I read that and many times. Now, some of you have read this book. It's called The Promulgation of Universal Peace. That's what PUP refers to. It's a series of talks that Abdu'l-Baha gave during his time in North America, 239 days traveling from New York to San Francisco and back, and on the train, and spent some time in Montreal. It's really amazing the things that he shared with people to give a vision about the future and what Baha'u'llah, his father's teachings were and would become for the benefit of the whole world. Now, this is a thing that really awakened me a long time ago. First of all, I'm from Montreal, so this was kind of an important little piece. And the Maxwell home, I used to work at the Montreal General Hospital, and the Maxwell home is right across the street from the Montreal General. Now the Baha'i stayed there. Now it's become the shrine in Montreal, and a place that Baha'is will visit and their friends and say some prayers and reflect there and think about the time that Abdul Baha was there with the Maxwell family, talking to the friends and so forth. And Abdul Baha said September the 1st, 1912, a long time ago, folks. Today, the world of humanity is walking in darkness because it's out of touch with the world of God. That is why we do not see the signs of God in the hearts of men. The power of the Holy Spirit has no influence. When a divine spiritual illumination becomes manifest in the world of humanity, when divine instruction and guidance appear, then enlightenment follows. And a new spirit is released within a new power descends and a new life is given. It is like the birth from the animal kingdom into the kingdom of man. Now, he was referring that, and this is out of context, of course, from the extraordinary talk he was giving in Montreal and across North America, that when we're out of touch with the word of God, and we're not informed by the intent of God, we really are lost. And you can say, well, yeah, I don't need that. Well, but he's saying we're really lost. And and the teachings of God releases from that sort of lower nature, the animal kingdom. And animals are meant to be remaining in the animal kingdom. God, that's what they're there for, but we're not to remain in the animal kingdom. We're to become humans, and we're to become that spiritual being that that's been conferred upon us. When Baha'u'llah says, noble have I created thee, then reflect that nobility, let it become manifested. That's what I understand spirituality is about, manifesting that latent, that potential that is within us, that reality that is us, that spiritual being that is us. Okay, I want to end with these quotes, with this last two, and then I want to read this to you. This was a letter, part of a letter to the youth of Iran. Many of us know that the faith in Iran, right from its inception, has not met with great enthusiasm by numbers of people in Persia, notably the clergy and many of the followers. It meant it was going to shake and shape and reshape Persia, and that obviously when something new comes, many people are frightened of newness, but in this case, they were really and have been and are still extraordinarily frightened of the new message of God for this day. It just terrifies them. And what do they want to do? They try to stop it, and they can't stop it. They will never be able to stop it. No matter what they try to do, you cannot change and thwart the truth. It just will keep coming out all over the place. And it's all over the world now. The House of Justice wrote to these youth in a number of years ago, and this is the end of the letter that they wrote. And they're talking about the true conception of religion. So if we can think about spirituality deriving its power from religion and from its moral compass from religion, let me just describe to you what true spirituality, I think, is about. He says, you surely see how throughout the world the light of true religion is fading. True, not religion, but true religion. Yet you are the very examples of what illumination this light can bring. Now imagine an institution of governance, in this case, the Universal House of Justice, writing to people and saying, you are the very examples of what illumination this light can bring. Imagine how extraordinary that would be to hear that elevating concept that you're the source of illumination. They're writing to the youth of Iran. You are living proofs that religion promotes upright character. Now think of these as being spirituality, concepts of spirituality. Upright character instills forbearance, compassion, forgiveness, magnanimity, high-mindedness. Religion prohibits harm to others and invites souls to the plane of sacrifice, that they may give of themselves for the good of others. It imparts a world-embracing vision and cleanses the heart from self-centeredness and prejudice. It inspires souls to build unity, to endeavor for material and spiritual betterment for all, to see their own happiness and that of others, to advance learning and science, to be an instrument of true joy, and to revive the body of humankind. True religion burnishes the mirror of the souls until it reflects the qualities of the spirit with which it has been endowed. And then the power of the divine attributes is manifested in the individual and collective lives of humanity and aids the emergence of a new social order. Such is the true conception of religion set forth in the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And then they end by praise be to God that you are ever striving to model your lives after the sublime pattern enshrined in his teachings. Now, can you imagine receiving a letter like that ever in your life, speaking to you personally, that your lives are the lives which are illuminating, giving light to the world and to the soul because of what you're doing. And you've embraced these teachings and you're trying to live them. You're trying not to, you're prohibiting its harm to others, and you're inviting souls to the plane of sacrifice. Well, it's extraordinary to think that this is really what religion is about. It has nothing to do with sort of customs and rituals. It has to do with this living a life of the soul, that you would then become this reflective spiritual being that you truly are. Let me read this last quote. This is from Paris Talks, and I love this. I know Meim loves this quote too. We've read it many times, and she's referred to it on a number of occasions. A man living with his thoughts in this kingdom knows perpetual joy. All ills, all flesh is heir to, do not pass him by, but they only touch the surface of his life. The depths are calm and serene. Well, folks, I wanted to share those quotes with you and then sort of come back with some other ideas and concepts. Although I think it's pretty filling what I've shared with you already. But I think that, you know, I can't imagine anybody not wanting to be a good person. Maybe some people make a career of not being good, but even then they're probably trying to be good at what they're doing. So I guess you could say, well, I guess we all want to be good at one way or another. But preferably you'd be good at being good, not good at being bad, which doesn't seem to be so hard to do for many of us. But it's easier to be good to know if you know what to be good at trying to do. You know what I'm saying? It's not like I'm trying to guess. I mean, I realized that when I became a Baha'i and I had to be good at trying to like people praying in different languages, and I couldn't really avoid it because there they were. I'm thinking, well, you know, this is Baha'u'llah's way of making me grow up. I guess that's the only way to put it. And you know, now to be, and I mean this lovingly, I just miss it when we don't hear prayers in different languages. I'm thinking, I'm missing the world. Something's going on, like you're sort of being short on something. And it's because you really start to feel the love that Baha'u'llah has brought into this world about the oneness of humankind, and that we are one large family, and we're all struggling to try to make this a better place. And we make lots of mistakes along the way, and then we pick each other up, and then we just keep moving along and so forth. It can't be anything better than that. I mean, you know, you have a huge worldwide community of people who are just, and I mean this, struggling. Because we're just not perfect at all. We're just, you know, we're kind of learning how to be better. And we make a lot of mistakes getting there, but you know, I think we're getting better. I mean, I've been a Baha'i a few decades now, and some of you have been Baha'i maybe even longer than that. And you would say, well, maybe the Baha'i community is different than it was 60, 70 years ago. And it wasn't like it was in the old days. Well, no, because it was the old days, and now it's the new days, and the faith has grown and developed, and different people have become Baha'is, and the vision of Baha'u'llah's world-embracing vision is capturing the hearts of people all over the world. So yeah, it's going to change a lot as we go along. You know, I wanted to end with a couple of other ideas for you to consider. You know, one of the really important things to do, and I know many of you are doing it, is really encouraging the youth, many of them, to consider giving periods of service before they get committed in their lives to whatever they're going to be committed to forever. You know, we in our family, we've had a real privilege of having a number of our grandkids do periods of service. Our kids, our sons did it as well. Meim and I often laugh about it because in the time when our sons went away to do periods of service, there weren't any cell phones. We never knew where they were. And I say thank God, because sometimes when we heard the stories when they came back from service, I'm glad we didn't know what they were doing. I mean, nothing bad, of course, but let me give you an example. Two of our sons were in Bolivia once, and Maureen would like this because it was her husband, and we love Brett a lot. But Brett was there with his brother Darren, and they were up in the mountains of Bolivia, way up high. I don't think it was La Paz, but they were up there somewhere. And you know, they were kind of looking a little grungy. In all respect to the Persians, I know that we're supposed to dress appropriately, but they were not dressed too appropriately. They had some jeans on, and they had their t-shirts and so forth. But they were up there to serve the faith, and God loved them. They did it, and so forth. So they were in this village this one time in this town, and this police officer came, or either the police officer, or yes, it was the local police constable, came to them and said, "Are you Mormon missionaries?" And I think it was Brett or Darren said, "Do we look like Mormon missionaries?" And of course, they're always very tidy looking, and God love them. I'm sure they're sincere in what they're doing, but they have white shirts on, and their tie and so forth. And Brett and Darren look nothing like that, if I can put it gently. And so the police officer said, "Oh, that's great to know. Come on and have a Coca-Cola with me." Like, it was this wonderful sense of being just a person loving the faith of Baha'u'llah and just wanting to share it with other people, and not sort of in a pretentious way, but just going up there, learning to live with people that you would never have chosen to live with unless you were a Baha'i. I remember Darren, our son, was in Venezuela once, and he was up in the area where a large number of the indigenous people were. And one of the indigenous people said, "No one ever comes and visits us." He said, "Are you sure you're not one of the police?" And he said, "No, I'm not one of the police." And he said, "Because only the police visit us." Like, I mean, he said, "Well, I'm not a police." And he said, "Okay, come on in." And they would share their potatoes with him. Like, he said that the peoples of the world are fundamentally so wonderful. And we have just somehow isolated ourselves from humanity because of our prejudices towards people and so forth. And my thinking is that what Baha'u'llah has come to do is just stir the pot and make us love each other, and and get out there and see people that are different and learn to appreciate his creation, like what he's done. And so when the young youth can do something like that, and I know that that's happened in the last few years with our family and other youth that I know well, you get a sense that you learn something that you can never not know. How could you go to another country and be there for several months and make friends and not love the world? You know what I'm saying? It's just, you can't not do it. You do it, and you don't go as a tourist, because I mean, I don't suggest you can't be a tourist sometime, but wouldn't it be much nicer to go and get to know people, not just to look at them, and talk with them, and not just, I don't know. So anyway, that's one of the little stories that I feel is really important. The other thing too about being spiritual is that for some people, spirituality is so simple for them, it seems. I remember a wonderful story when I served many years ago as a counselor, but it's happened more currently too on other occasions. And that, it was in one of the countries in South America, and there was a man there that had become a Baha'i, and he couldn't read at all, like nothing at all. But he had been told by one of the Baha'is that he should learn to say every day a little prayer around noontime. It's called the obligatory prayer, a necessary prayer to say. And he says that, "I bear witness, oh my God, that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. I testify at this moment to my powerlessness and to thy might, to my poverty and to thy wealth. There is none other God but thee, the help in peril, the self-subsisting." So that's the prayer. It's beautiful. Well, I thought, well, now, this man was told he has to say this prayer, and someone gave him the prayer on a piece of paper. Well, he couldn't read the paper. He was illiterate. And so for every day, for about 6 months, until someone went back to visit him, he used to hold this piece of paper up like this at noon, because he was a Baha'i and he wanted to do what God wanted him to do. And that was all he could do. But he was a spiritual being that was just reaching out to do what God had asked him to do. And he was trying to do it the best way he could. And you would say, well, well, maybe he should learn to say the prayer. Well, he learned it after, but for 6 months, he just held it. And you'd say, well, was that good enough? I think it was better than good enough. I think if you're that committed to serve God and you're doing your best, well, isn't that good? So when my colleagues at this course for 2 days said they wanted to be good, would they hold a piece of paper up every day at noon to see what happens? Like would they say the prayer? I don't know. But I'm just offering you that I don't think it's so complex. I think that we can spend our life wandering around trying to become spiritual. And yet, when Baha'u'llah has given us sort of beautiful things to try and do and remember, well, then maybe that's the pathway of spirituality that we should be choosing to follow and doing our best. And then learning that that's what it is to be a spiritual being. I told this story before about spiritualities, but I think I will tell it again. There may be a few people on the call that haven't heard it, but in Africa a number of years ago, there was a man there, and some of you would remember Mr. Kaiser Barnes, who was a member of the Universal House of Justice a number of years ago, a very great big African man. I just love the guy so much, and his wife is much smaller than he is. And they had pioneered to Africa to be as Baha'is. And Kaiser told us once a story where he'd gone to a village and he and his wife, there was an illiterate African man there that was a Baha'i, and he kept telling Kaiser, said, I want to have my own Baha'i Bible. Now, in the Baha'i faith, we don't have a Bible per se, but it's just, but Kaiser understood he wanted some Baha'i writings, because in that part of the world, the Bible was a holy book, and he wanted a Baha'i holy book. So, but they couldn't decide what to do, because I knew he couldn't read. So what if they gave him a book, and then someone said, "Well, read the book," and he couldn't read? Would he feel embarrassed? So you'd sort of think, well, maybe we won't give him a book after all. I don't know. Anyway, finally they decided one day they would do this during the intercalary day period, just before the fast began, and so they gave him gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah. And then he was walking around with his book in his arm all the time, and he was so happy to have his own Baha'i Bible. Well, anyway, one day this man said to Kaiser, I want you to come down to this other village and teach the Baha'i faith to some African ladies that have been hearing. Now I'm thinking, wouldn't this be wonderful if this had been like in at the Congo, where we now have a house of, I don't know which country it was, and it doesn't matter, but anyway. So Kaiser said, yeah, I'd be glad to go and help you teach the Baha'i faith. So they walked down this road to this other village, and there was this hut there, and these African ladies were sitting inside, and they were all dressed up very beautiful. And so they got there, and then this African man says to Kaiser, now you teach them about the Baha'i faith. And he said, well, no, you're a Baha'i, you teach them. No, you teach. Well, then you could imagine back and forth. Finally, Kaiser, who was very eloquent in speech and very impressive man, so knowledgeable. So he taught about the Baha'i faith to these African ladies. And he said to them, now after this talk, he said, now you could become Baha'is too, if you believe this. And they said, oh, we would love to be Baha'is, but we could never talk like you. He said, well, you don't have to talk like me. You just have to, if you believe what I'm saying, well, then you're a Baha'i. And he said, well, I know, but we could never be like you. You don't have to be like me, he said. So finally, this African man with the book, there's a letter, said, I'm a Baha'i and I have my Baha'i Bible. And he said, and I read it every day. Now, I don't know where this came from. And so Kaiser looks at him, and he thought he misunderstood what he said, because he knows he couldn't read. Well, so finally they're talking again about being Baha'is and this and that. This African man says, I have my own Baha'i Bible and I read it every day. Well, by the second time now, Kaiser hears it and says, well, what do you mean you read your Baha'i Bible every day? because he knows he can't read. Well, he said, Baha'u'llah says you're supposed to read the writings morning and evening. He said, yes, I am. He said, well, he said, every night when I go to bed, I put it under my pillow and bang, it goes right into my head. And every morning I wake up and put it on my heart, it goes right into my heart. I read my writings morning and evening. Now, folks, isn't that extraordinary? You see, like you think, I don't mean if you can read, you have to do that every night, but I'm thinking, here is a man trying to obey Baha'u'llah's teachings, right? He was just doing his very best. So once he had his Baha'i book, he could at least start to use it in an effective way. Well, I think that some people's idea of spirituality is much more pure than maybe North Americans. And I love you all because you're all North Americans, but I don't think it's ever intended to be so complex, you see. I think it's meant to be doing what God is asking us to do in this day and becoming, that is our spiritual reality manifesting itself. And is it difficult? Oh yeah, it's hard. But is there an advancing civilization? Oh yeah, it's good. I see youth today that when I was a youth their age, I thought, you know, God love them. They're so much better than I was. I don't know, like I don't know. I really believe in an ever advancing civilization. I can tell you when I see that. So I want to share those ideas with you because I don't think that the teachings of God have ever been meant to be complex. They're for the whole world. They're for every people of all different capacities and abilities and whatever. And we should never feel that somehow someone can be more spiritual than another. We are latently spiritual beings. But to manifest that spirituality, I think it's pretty important to know what God wants done. You know, someone asked Shoghi Effendi once about, you know, what we could do as Baha'is and, you know, should we be investing ourselves in this activity or another activity? Should we join this club or that club? Again, nothing wrong with it. But he says there are hundreds and thousands of well-wishers of mankind, and I'm just paraphrasing here, bent on trying to make this a better world, but a pitiful few that are prepared to do it the way God wants it done. So I think the way God wants it done is the way that we could reflect our spirituality most effectively. That's what I'm suggesting. So as we try to remember to say our prayers every day and read the writings and go to the feast and contribute to the societal development and encourage our friends around us about the future of the world that will become better, invite them to the teachings of the faith. My understanding is that that's what a spiritual being is about. It's not about your personal development exclusively. It's about your personal development in concert with societal development. That's what I understand. And the more society develops, the more you will develop. So I think we have a little way to go on both counts. I think we have a long way to go, but there's no turning back. I can put it that way. We're on a one-way street here. A lot of bumps in the road. There's a lot of things we have to go around. We have to train a lot. We have to do our Ruhi books. We have to learn, and then I think we will find a joy in spiritual development as we go along. Well, Fons, I'm really I'm sort of finished talking, but I'd be glad to answer any questions or maybe you can give me some answers too. I've created a lot of confusion for you. I hope not.
No, absolutely not. Dave, thank you so much. We got it. We got our wonderful Dr. David Smith talk, full of personal anecdotes and wonderful, inspiring stories, and the quotes. You always select a really interesting grouping of quotations, and I could see a bunch of us taking pictures of our screen, so we'll have those to refer back to later. So just to get us going, please feel free to use the raise the hand button or put in the chat a question directly to me and I'll moderate the questions. But I think Dave has a little bit of time here to address any of your questions. So while we wait for that to get going, Dave, I really liked how you addressed the, the cynicism towards religion. Seems like we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And you talked about all the world's religions as being this collective moral compass. I think that's kind of countercurrent to the way we think about religion in today's environment. There's just really a sense of doing away with it. But your talk tonight really focused on the the darkness, walking in darkness, if we don't have that light of God's teaching. So I wanted to express that I enjoyed listening to how you talked through that argument, and it's not an easy argument to discuss in today's environment.
Well, thanks for that, because, I think like when Baha'u'llah says, we should associate with the people of all religions, it's so important that, because, well, some of us grew up in a part of the world at the time when Catholics and Protestants didn't get together. And that wasn't so long ago, that you weren't going to have a friend who was Jewish. I mean, we're just talking about recent history, folks. And we're talking about, so when Baha'u'llah has said to us, we must do this, this is kind of counter to everything we were kind of learning maybe 60, 70 years ago, and maybe even current in some parts of the world. So Baha'u'llah really stirred it up. I mean, when you think about the thing, we take some of these things maybe for granted because we're Baha'is, and we say, why doesn't everyone get it? But boy, the things that he has brought to the world are really world shaking and shaping. And we may be being more and more comfortable, but it wasn't long ago we were uncomfortable. You see, is collectively uncomfortable. Someone mentioned on the chat there, I noticed that about Greenland, and well, Meim and I are going to Greenland next month again. Well, this will be our 33rd visit to Greenland. I'm afraid the ice is melting. We didn't want it to melt that fast at all, because we like to go and tell people it was really cold, and now it's getting warmer in Greenland. And even though I guess that's part of the plan, it's a wonderful community, folks. I always like to put a plug for the North, and we recently were in a Whitehorse, and we were in a Yellowknife not too long ago as well. And we kind of love the North a lot. I think it's because it's kind of laid back. I don't, we like cities, but we kind of like the North a lot. It's really, and they're sweet people. I just
Dave,
really
I put my little party emoji up when you said this will be your 33rd trip, but the second or two delay meant that I put the party sign up when you said all the ice is melting, and I just wanted to make sure everyone knows I'm not partying over the ice melt.
Good. Okay.
Okay. So the question is, if you have a story, if you have any stories you can share from Greenland.
There's Sue. Yeah.
Greenland.
Sue has her hand up. Yeah.
And do you want to share a story from Greenland? And then
well, Sue Emil has her hand up, so maybe we could hear what she has to say.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for noticing that, Dr. Smith. I happen to have some really deeply, deeply loved friends, Baha'i friends in Greenland, and I visited Greenland myself in 1992 before, just before they were able to elect their first National Spiritual Assembly. I never met any sweeter people, I'm serious, in the entire world. And some of those friends, I have to tell you, love you so much, Dr. Smith. They rave about you and they look forward to your visits. And so I'm so glad that you continue to go back, even though it's not a required duty of you. That's an evidence of the love that you feel. And that reminds me of what Abdu'l-Baha said about Greenland and what would happen in Greenland with that love, because I associate that with the global warming. It's not just a science, but it's also a spiritual prophecy. Could you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Of course, I never quite understand how the spiritual and the material work together in a mysterious way, but there's no question that Abdu'l-Baha talks about the ice of Greenland melting as the spiritual climate goes up. And you would say, well, and it's happening, there's no question. Meim and I have been, as you know, as I mentioned several times, and I'm so happy to know you've been to Greenland. Not many people have been there, I have to say, and you know, and it's just a blessed place to go. But the thing is that the people of Greenland are connected spiritually with the people of Canada. The tablets of the divine plan, the master wrote, and there's 2 tablets which address to Canada and Greenland specifically. So we feel a real, and you know what, before 9/11, which for a lot of you was a long time ago, and some of you would remember, but some of you remember, there was a direct flight from Iqaluit over to Nuuk, which is the capital of Greenland. And so we were able to get over there quite easily. Well, Sue has got up here, should the fire of the love of God be kindled in Greenland, all the ice will melt. I hope it's the love of God only that's doing this. I have a feeling a lot of it's climate change as well. But clearly the love of God in Greenland has burgeoned over the last number of years. And it began with some very tough pioneers. And I say that in the most loving way. You have to be spiritually and physically and morally tough to have gone there in the first instance, because it was not that hospitable to people who were of the first Baha'is. It was hard. I remember Lotus Nielsen, and some of you would not have known her name, but Meim and I knew her. She was this wonderful Baha'i, and she was just unbelievable. She would get on a boat and she would go up from the capital Nuuk up the coast of Greenland and go to maybe the first place, Sissimut. She'd get off the boat, put her little box down in front of her on the port with her Baha'i books and stand there. And then no one would pay attention to her. She'd fold up her box, get on the boat, go up to Asiat, get off the boat, do the same thing, go up to Ilulissat. I mean, God love her. She just did this. She was just intrepid. And when she was dying, I have to tell you this, Gordon Naylor, who many of you know, Gordon Naylor had gone to Greenland as well. And, you know, because Meim and I were always telling people to go to Greenland. Some of them behaved and went. I don't know if that's the reason, but they did go. And Gordon was one of them. And she was dying, Lotus. This is when she's dying. And Gordon is with her at the bedside. And she's saying to Gordon, now, when you go up to so-and-so, do this. And then she'd sort of go into a coma. And then she'd wake up and tell him to do this. And then she'd go back into a coma. She was just ruthless. Like, she wouldn't stop. And I'm thinking, like, what kind of a soul does this? You know, that their last breath, they're bossing people around about teaching the faith. Like, I mean, it's just, I love it. I have to tell you, I hope in the next world I get to see these souls. If God gives me the permission, because they're just amazing, you know, that they have done this. Well, the history of the faith is people like that. The first early Baha'is, some of them were women in some countries they'd never even knew how to say. And so, you know, this was Lotus Nielsen. There's been others like her. I mean, all over the world, but just an amazing thing. Sue, yeah, there's your hand. Yeah.
That your story, and I know Lotus Nielsen. I met her when I was there, and
wow. Yeah,
she was one of the organizers for the Baha'i summer school that I attended that year. But it reminds me, first of all, that tablet that Abdu'l-Baha revealed for the Baha'is of Canada and Greenland, and especially Greenland, when he revealed those tablets in 1916 and 1917, it was addressed to the Baha'is of Greenland, but there were no Baha'is in Greenland at that time. So Abdu'l-Baha even knew in advance there would be Baha'is. And the first, if you could tell a story of the first Greenlandic Baha'i, my understanding is that he corresponded with a woman from Denmark for 10 years and actually helped her in the translation of the book Baha'u'llah and the New Era into Greenlandic, and then subsequently became a Baha'i upon her visit. Tell a little about.
Well, I don't know all the details, but I'm glad you brought it up, because eventually after 10 years, she actually went to Greenland and visited him.
In fact, that he said,
and
I
he
heard
became
that I heard that he said he wanted to become a Baha'i, but he wanted to meet her in
He wanted to
person.
meet a Baha'i. Yeah.
He wanted
Yeah,
to meet her in person.
yeah.
And then on her visit there, he did
Yeah.
become I did join. But I'm impressed with the 10 years of correspondence. And in those days, we didn't have internet, didn't have instant and immediate unlimited correspondence like we do now with the internet. You know, this was by mail that took days and maybe even months to get back and forth because it was only by ship, you know,
That's right. I know, it's just, well, it's amazing. And you think when Abdu'l-Baha went back to Palestine, to the Holy Land after his trip to North America, you know, the First World War was there and communications were basically cut off. And, you know, and then he wrote back. And I'm always saying to the Baha'is, and I'm so grateful to the women because the women had all the questions and they wrote Abdu'l-Baha and he answered all the questions. And thank God they did that, because then we have all the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, because, you know, he answered questions that they had, and it wasn't many men that had questions. I'm thinking, wow, thank God women had all these questions because the answers were brilliant, you see? So I don't think there's any religion in the world where women have taken such a role in the world to move the process forward in such a convincing way, in such a decided way. But I wanted to also tell you another thing about Greenland. And you would know Martin Chimnitz, then I guess, since you've been there. His father was the bishop of the Danish Lutheran Church, and he became a Baha'i. And you know, it's the state religion of Greenland, the Danish Lutheran Church. And so one of the Baha'is there, who we know really well, wrote a beautiful piece of music for Christmas for the church. And at the time, the local bishop of the church or priestess, she wouldn't let them sing it because it was a Baha'i, it was inspired by the Baha'i teachings, even though it was all about Christ. I mean, this is how bad religion has become for some people, you know, that. And so when Baha'u'llah says, oh, enter the churches and the synagogues and the mosques and associate with the people of all religions, it's a very bold statement. You know, when you think about it, that even today, and maybe 20 years ago, someone couldn't sing in this church something composed by a Baha'i. I mean, that's pretty current, right? So I'm not so sure that we're not doing things which are really kind of extraordinary. And I don't mean we're terrific. I'm just saying we just take it for granted. But boy, oh boy, it's not. It's really new, you know, for people. Anyway, yeah. Oh, I've got a story from China. Yes, Charles, that would be great. Doctor, can you tell? Oh, can I tell a story from China? Oh my God. Oh, can I tell a story?
What
Well,
are you reading, Dave? Are you reading a chat?
yeah, I'm seeing a
Oh,
chat down.
okay. And then we have Shala waiting to ask a question as well.
Okay, let's do that, and I'll tell you a story from China. Sure, Shala.
Yes, David, it's so nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Known each other since 1969.
Oh my gosh, yes. We were both younger then.
Yes, we were. It's interesting about Greenland because when Ron and I met and got engaged in Britain, he stopped on his way in Greenland to go before he came back to Canada to get a job so we could get married. And of course, the NSA of Britain had asked him to stop there. And I was kind of not very keen on Greenland because when I found out the temperature, you know, I'm not. So when I arrived in Montreal, I said to Ron, why did you go to Greenland? He said, well, the NSA asked me, but also, you know, it's in the tablets of divine plan. Let's sit down and read it. So we started reading the tablets, and for me, it was the first time. And I said, okay, Abdu'l-Baha is asking us for hardship, and maybe I could manage. But that when we arrived in Montreal, it was spring, April, and we had a blizzard, and I nearly did not make it in Canada. I nearly left and went back home. So Ron decided that maybe Greenland was not for us. We moved 29 times in 49 years, but not to what I call the frozen north. But my question is this. It's fascinating to me that the Baha'i community has evolved. And it was a time that you had to be 50 and older to truly be able to directly be involved in teaching. And those of us who were younger, we were kind of would sit in the back and wait for those older Baha'is to kind of tell us what to do. But now I find that my kids and my grandkids are telling me what's to be done next, because they seem that they are on top of things with the letters from Universal House of Justice and the institute process. And a lot of my age people, they're sort of sitting back and looking at what they should do. And of course, I am involved in some of these things, but I'm wondering, what is your advice to those of us who are sitting back and letting those young people do the work?
Well, I'm not sure that you're not doing the work, but in a very different way. I mean, the Baha'i faith calls for all different types of service. And I'm not suggesting my wife and I render a lot of service, but we have a lot of youth staying here on weekends. We sort of have an Airbnb without the money. That's all I'm saying. We're fortunate enough to have a bit of place where youth can stay and then do things on the weekend. And we love it because, to be quite honest, and I agree with you, they just know so much. But they have also, they have a flexibility of life that what I would have, and we would have had when we were much younger. You know, you had less responsibilities and so forth. I think, though, the thing is we have an opportunity at every age to try to reach our own generation with a message. And I think, you know, not everyone who's a teenager or in their 20s will become a Baha'i, but we can be teaching people in their 70s and 80s. You know, I had a number of cases a number of years ago, and I'll tell you this story, and then I'll tell you something about China, because Meim and I love China so much as Greenland, I have to put, well, in a different, you know, well, we love the world. So let me tell this story. We had this situation where, well, let me just give you this example about China, then I will come back. We were in China for many years, and then since COVID and so forth, it's been very difficult to go back. And now, you know, the political situation is kind of tense, and we're not so convinced that it's the wisest thing to do right now, even for the Baha'is there, for us to go, because it's not been easy for them and us. But we really miss them. We have so many friends there. But anyway, one year we were there, and we went late at night to have a devotional with a group of the Chinese Baha'is and one of the other pioneers that was there. But you know, the Chinese Baha'is are really taking it on their own responsibility. They're just wonderful. And so we were there one night, and it was about 11 o'clock at night, and we were going around, and one of the Chinese women Baha'i spoke to me. He said, "Well, can my husband say a prayer too?" And I said, "Well, everyone can pray. Like, there's no order. Just." He said, "Well, he'd like to say a prayer." I said, "Well, fine." So everyone is going around the room saying a prayer, and it's all in Chinese. And God love it, the world. My Chinese it's terrible. I great with Chinese food. I just love it, but I cannot understand very much Chinese. So I had no idea what prayers they were saying, but I knew it was lovely. And we were all sitting there in 11 o'clock at night, and prayers are being said in Chinese. And all of a sudden it comes to this man who is sitting there, and he starts to say this prayer, and it's all by memory. And all of a sudden I heard Ahmad during the prayer. I said, "Oh, that's the tablet of Ahmad." Okay. Now I'm speaking Chinese, right? No, I only knew the word Ahmad. So I said, "Oh God, this is beautiful. I know this prayer." And so anyway, he finally finishes the prayer, and my Meim and I were there, and I turned to the wife and I said, "Well, that was wonderful." And I said, "That was he said, "Yes." I said, "How long has your husband been a Baha'i?" 4 months. He had memorized the Tablet of Achmed in Chinese. Like, I mean, folks, I don't know, but I mean, many parts of the world, people just do things that are just, I'm embarrassed about it. Like in terms of, I just wish I could do. I mean, no, that would be envy, right? I can't be envious. That's not spiritual. But you know, when someone has been a Baha'i 4 months and they've already memorized the Tablet of Achmed and they're saying it by memory, I'm thinking, I'm jealous a little bit, you know, like I wish I could do that. Anyway, I share that with you because every time we've gone to China, we have been so impressed with their devotion to the faith and their love of the children. And they really understand about the education of children and the quality of women and men. And, you know, it's you know, Abdu'l-Baha said, you know, China word, and, you know, and the future of China is very great. And I'm thinking, in spite of what's happening in the world now, and it's so screwed up, and I say that in a, you know, it's a mess, but the future of the world is great, folks. And, you know, we're all going to have to come to Baha'u'llah eventually and realize that we're really messing up this world for, what was that little quote that Abdu'l-Baha says, this world is too small to be divided. Like it's too little. And we just need to spread the message of the faith that, you know, we're just messing around with stuff. It's just preposterous that what we are doing to each other for a plot of land. I don't know, but well, you all know that. So it is kind of embarrassing. What was my other story I was going to tell you? I can't remember. It was something wonderful.
The small planet not worthy of division.
That's right, not worthy of division. Yeah.
Amazing.
Abdu'l-Baha sure could capture it, eh? Oh my goodness. Oh,
Yeah,
it's just
something.
really extraordinary.
I'm just going to jump in, Dave, and see if anyone else has any question. I don't know if we'll go more than maybe another 5 more minutes.
No, I think that's fine. Yeah, it's
nice
been
break.
a long time for you all. I really appreciate you all
you
being
as well.
Yeah.
I don't see anything further in the comment except for, you know, just wonderful accolades. Of course, comments about the women arriving and thanks to the, you know, spearheading of the faith, and a lot of appreciation for the stories that you tell, Dave, which is
thank you.
one of
It's fun for me. I have to really, you know, we all love the faith. I know we do. And nice to be able to, and seeing Bachman and the Bahadors here, we're all China fans. So yeah, it's really, we had some time with Bachman and Meim and I going over to English corner in China once. And I have to tell you, Bachman is so clever how he gets to talk about the faith teaching English. I've never seen anyone so clever. He would say, what do you want to talk about today? This is all the Chinese students. And he'd always get them to come around to spiritual topics, how we learn about English with spiritual themes. So very clever, Bachman.
David, you did a great job in China. I love you.
Well, we had a great time.
You did great, yeah.
Lots of fun there. Yeah. You know, I'll leave you with one more Chinese story. One of our friends in China, he's the head of the hospital at which I go to, and Bachman would probably remember this, but he was on a plane flying from Singapore once with another Baha'i from the United States, and they're both eye specialists, ophthalmologists, and he was sitting on the plane with this man that we know, and he flew from Singapore to Beijing, and on the way to Beijing, this man, the Baha'i from the United States, actually was teaching him about the Baha'i faith, and by the time he got to Beijing, which is like maybe 4.5 hours or so, he said, I'm a Baha'i. Like this was a 4.5 hour trip. And so when we got to China the first time, he met me at the airport, and my wife and Meim and I, we had come through from Hong Kong and we flew over to Tianjin. He came to the airport. Mind you, he was much younger than we were, all much younger, but he had become a Baha'i. And it was really interesting because, you know, in different cultures, to be able to express the Baha'i faith, you have to be somewhat reserved. You know, you have to be, obviously, you know, you're asked to to respect the government and all of these things which Baha'is are endeavoring to do everywhere. But he loves the Baha'i faith, and he just has had to be quite careful in his life, what he says and does and how he behaves and so forth, and as it should be. I was reading more recently, and you might want to have a chance to look about the guidance that the Guardian gave to the German Baha'i community during the war. It's quite extraordinary. They suffered immensely. Some of the German Baha'is were killed. Some of them, Lydia Zamenhof, who was the daughter of the founder of Esperanto, the language. I didn't know this. Well, I knew who Zamenhof was, but I didn't know he was an ophthalmologist. I would have felt even better about him because I'm an ophthalmologist. But he invented Esperanto, this world language that he developed because he thought it would unite people of the world if they could speak one language. Pretty clear what Baha'u'llah said about having an auxiliary language. And his daughter Lydia, who was born in 1905, became a Baha'i. And she did a lot of translation of the Baha'i faith, the writings of the Baha'i faith. And she was finally put in prison in the ghetto in Treblinka, and she was gassed. She was killed. And she would not be a Baha'i. She would not give up her faith. And so, we have stories in the faith which are quite extraordinary. So if you have a chance to read about that, it's really quite an amazing story. So she lives right to the end and not recanting. And I think of that when you think of Mona and the other 9 women who gave their lives over 30 years ago in Iran because they believed in Baha'u'llah and they could not give up the truth. So that's spiritual, folks. That's spirituality. Okay.
That's
Let's
a
say goodnight.
powerful note to end on. Thank you, Dave. I'm going to
Okay.
just express everyone's thank you to you and Meim for coming this evening and bringing fresh stories, insights, and possibly quotations to us. If you've put messages in the chat, don't worry. I've taken some pictures and I'll forward them over to Dave, who has been busy presenting and maybe didn't have a chance to read everything. So
Thanks so much. Good to see you all.
I'm going to just remind the friends that these talks are recorded. Actually, I'm going to stop it.
Okay.
I'm going to stop it in a moment. Here we go. I'm going to stop.